At the start of the film, we meet Joe and Laura, a married couple enjoying a peaceful vacation in the Polish countryside. Former top-secret agents for the U.S., they chose early retirement to pursue a more meaningful life together. Soon after, two French tourists arrive in the area and coincidentally cross paths with Joe and Laura during breakfast. The four quickly hit it off, exchanging stories about their lives and careers. During the conversation, the female tourist mentioned she worked as a doctor at a hospital. Curious, she asked Joe and Laura about their professions. Choosing to keep their past hidden, the couple casually replied that they owned a small shop. After breakfast, Joe and Laura headed back to their lodging. Joe proposed joining the other tourists for a countryside exploration, but Laura, feeling unwell, chose to stay behind. She urged Joe to go without her and assured him she'd be fine resting at the guest house until he returned. Though a bit reluctant, Joe eventually agreed and left with the group. Before departing, he quietly concealed a gun on himself as a precaution. As the group ventured deep into the forest, guided by a local escort, two CIA pilots flew a reconnaissance aircraft overhead, heading straight for the area where Joe and the tourists were exploring. Then, without warning, a gunshot rang out from behind, striking the plane and sending it spiraling out of control before crashing into the forest below. Hearing the explosion, Joe instinctively sprinted toward the source of the blast. At the same time, back at the guest house, Laura spotted a column of thick black smoke rising from the forest. Concerned for Joe's safety, she quickly sent a message using the satellite phone. Moments later, Joe and the group of tourists reached the crash site. Without a second thought, Joe and the female doctor they had met at breakfast rushed forward to assess the condition of the two pilots. However, both pilots had been shot in the head, clear signs of a deliberate execution. Joe and the female doctor quickly realized this was no mere accident. The plane had been intentionally brought down. Drawing on his past experience as a senior spy, Joe immediately identified the victims as CIA operatives. While searching their bodies, he discovered a hard drive in one agent's pocket and decided to take it with him. However, the female doctor quickly protested, arguing that the hard drive wasn't his to take and urging him to leave it. Joe stood his ground, insisting it could hold critical information they didn't yet understand. Unbeknownst to them, the plane's radio system was still active, inadvertently broadcasting their entire exchange back to CIA headquarters. Without delay, an agent monitoring the transmission reported the incident to his superiors, stressing the significance of the hard drive. It wasn't just a simple storage device, it contained explosive evidence implicating the CIA director in serious misconduct. Upon learning this, the director urgently demanded a precise report on the crash site's location. An agent swiftly responded, confirming it was deep within a remote forest in the Polish countryside. Meanwhile, the scene cuts back to Joe, who is becoming acutely aware that the situation is growing more perilous by the minute. Joe urgently urges the female doctor and the group of tourists to head back to the guest house, warning them that the area is no longer safe. But before they can move, a group of mercenaries emerges from the trees. At the front is Orland, the ruthless leader, who smirks and taunts the tour guide, subtly hinting that he knows their presence in the forest isn't as innocent as it seems. The tour guide, trying to defuse the tension, insists they're nothing more than tourists who accidentally stumbled upon the crash site. But Orland wasn't convinced. He turned to the female doctor and coldly asked where she was from. When she refused to respond, he shot her without hesitation, killing her instantly and sending the group into stunned silence. Stepping toward Joe, Orland demanded to know if he had recovered the hard drive from the wreckage. Staying composed, Joe denied any knowledge of it while secretly clutching the hard drive, hidden securely in the palm of his hand. Orland aimed his gun squarely at Joe, studying him closely for any sign of deceit. But Joe wasn't just anyone calm and composed. He expertly maintained his cover, convincing Orland he had no knowledge of the hard drive. As the mercenaries turned their attention to searching the wreckage, Joe spotted a fleeting window of opportunity. Seizing the moment, he swiftly commandeered one of their vehicles and tore off into the forest, racing to escape before the enemy could respond. Unfortunately, the car sputtered to a stop in the middle of the road. It was out of gas, stranding Joe in a perilous spot. But with sharp instincts and lightning-fast reflexes, he swiftly took down an approaching mercenary and commandeered his motorcycle, speeding off before the rest could react. The scene then shifts to Chester, an older, seasoned operative. Like Joe, He was once a secret agent, but unlike Joe, Chester was still actively serving the government. When Chester received a call from the CIA director, he was given a high-priority mission: capture Joe, no matter the cost. However, Chester, unafraid to question authority, boldly pushed back, reminding the director that Joe had retired 5 years ago and demanding to know the real reason behind the mission. The CIA director didn't deflect the question. Instead, he revealed the truth. Joe had stolen a crucial hard drive containing sensitive agency information, leaving them with no choice but to track him down. The CIA director didn't stop at just issuing the order. He sweetened the deal with a tempting offer. If Chester successfully captured Joe and retrieved the hard drive, he would earn double his usual salary. Viewing the mission as a duty to his country, Chester accepted without hesitation and set off for Poland. Meanwhile, Orland, the mercenary leader, had lost track of Joe, but was certain he was still somewhere hidden deep in the dense forest. Orland's failure sent him into a furious rage. Standing in the heart of the forest, he yelled a chilling threat if Joe didn't surrender. He would lead his men to the resort and slaughter all the tourists, including Joe's wife, Laura. Hiding nearby, Joe overheard the deadly ultimatum and quickly used his satellite phone to warn Laura of the imminent danger. Upon receiving the alert, Laura wasted no time and sprang into action. Drawing on her instincts as a former top-secret agent, Laura immediately shifted into combat mode. She gathered weapons and prepared for the impending fight. Without hesitation, she moved into the next room of the guest house, urgently instructing the tourists to hide under the beds for their safety. Just as she was securing the guests, 3 of Orland's men burst into the guest house. Before they could react, Laura struck with precision and lethal efficiency, neutralizing the threat with incredible skill. Meanwhile, Chester, the CIA operative and seasoned agent, arrived at a secluded hotel in the countryside. Deciding to test a poison he had personally developed, he administered it to the driver who had brought him there. Moments later, as the driver left the hotel, he suddenly collapsed and died from the poison's lethal effects. As he watched the scene unfold, Chester smirked with satisfaction, confident that his poison had worked perfectly. Meanwhile, Joe, utterly exhausted, returned to the settlement and slipped into an abandoned shop to rest. Taking advantage of the moment, he used a landline phone to call the CIA director. During the conversation, he demanded to know why the hard drive he had found was so crucial that it had attracted so much attention and danger. The CIA director demanded that Joe immediately surrender the hard drive, insisting it contained top-secret government data. But Joe refused to comply. He had uncovered the truth. The hard drive held crucial evidence exposing corruption within the CIA's leadership and among several high-ranking officers. Joe made his position clear. He had no intention of returning it, regardless of its value. Joe loathed corrupt officials like the CIA director and had already made up his mind to expose the hard drive's contents to the world. His declaration sent the CIA director into a frantic panic. He quickly traced the call to pinpoint Joe's location. Once he had the details, he immediately contacted Chester, relaying Joe's whereabouts and giving him a clear order: retrieve the hard drive at any cost. Chester accepted the mission without hesitation, determined to eliminate Joe in order to achieve his goal. Wasting no time, he headed straight for the shop where Joe was hiding, prepared to strike. Meanwhile, back at home, Joe expressed deep remorse, apologizing to Laura for the trouble he had caused by stealing the hard drive from the CIA jet. He explained that his actions were driven by a desire to expose the corruption of those in power, ensuring that no more corrupt politicians could harm the country in the future. Laura fully supported Joe's decision. She reassured him that she could take care of herself and urged him to stay safe. As soon as the call ended, Joe was unexpectedly visited by Chester. They greeted each other coolly, like old acquaintances. After a brief pause, Chester wasted no time, asking Joe directly if he was the one who took the hard drive from the wrecked CIA jet. Joe lied nonchalantly, claiming that Orland, the mercenary leader, was the one who had taken the hard drive. However, Chester wasn't easily deceived. Maintaining his calm, he advised Joe to hand over the hard drive to avoid any unnecessary conflict between them. To lighten the mood, Chester poured 2 drinks and offered one to Joe. But Joe, sensing something was amiss, politely refused. Rather than continue the argument over the hard drive, Joe shifted the conversation toward Orland, eager to learn who he really was and why so many forces were so desperate to get their hands on the drive. Chester didn't hesitate to answer, explaining that Orland was working for Russian intelligence, tasked with stealing the hard drive. If the Russians succeeded, they would gain access to a weaponized cache of information powerful enough to destabilize the United States with ease. Joe responded by challenging whether Chester truly believed the drive contained vital U.S. intelligence, or if it was simply evidence exposing the corruption of the CIA director and other high-ranking officers. However, Chester remained unfazed by the moral implications. He coldly declared that he didn't care at all about the contents of the hard drive. To Chester, the mission was the only thing that mattered, along with the hefty payment he'd received from the CIA for retrieving the hard drive. Meanwhile, at the lodge, Orland's henchmen were holding the tourists hostage. Remaining calm and composed, Laura quietly ascended to the upstairs, swiftly and silently taking down one of the guards. She then signaled the tourists to stay quiet and hide safely while she dealt with the remaining threats downstairs. Meanwhile, a group of Orland's mercenaries was lounging and drinking on the lower floor, completely unaware of the danger closing in on them. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the lodge, the heavy sound of a body hitting the floor. Startled, they rushed to investigate and found one of their own thrown down from above by Laura, lying motionless on the ground. Orland's right-hand man, who was also present, immediately ordered his subordinates to split up and search the upper floors for the attacker. However, after witnessing another comrade fall, he erupted in fury, commanding the remaining mercenaries to hunt down the perpetrator at any cost. As they began ascending the stairs, Laura was already in position, ready to ambush them. Laura quickly dispatched the mercenaries one by one, her movements swift and precise. However, despite her fierce resistance, she was eventually cornered, with multiple gun barrels aimed directly at her. Realizing she had no choice, she reluctantly prepared to surrender. But then, she remembered the small knife hidden in her hair. With a swift motion, she turned the tables, taking down the remaining guards. Finally, she came face to face with Orland's right-hand man. The fight was fierce, and despite her best efforts, Laura was ultimately overpowered, her strength drained from the brutal struggle. Her captor bound her to a chair, preparing to interrogate her. With a mocking sneer, he taunted her, asking why Americans always acted so tough, as if they were invincible. Laura, with unwavering calm, replied, "I'm not American. I'm German." With confidence, Laura declared that she and Joe were virtually unbeatable, a reputation that had made them two of the most formidable secret agents in the world. Upon hearing Joe's name, the man quickly realized she was his wife. Thinking on his feet, he ordered her to contact Joe and demand the immediate surrender of the hard drive. Laura didn't resist but set one condition. Laura insisted that he return her satellite phone, as it was the only way to reach Joe. Reluctantly, he handed it over to her. As soon as Laura took the phone, she quickly entered a secret code into the device. Without warning, a powerful explosion ripped through the room, throwing everything into chaos. Meanwhile, Orland and his team of mercenaries were still on the hunt for Joe and Chester. Following a lead, they arrived at a remote house, Joe's current hideout. A local farmer, who had unknowingly spotted Joe earlier, had inadvertently revealed his location. Once Orland received the information, he immediately ordered 3 of his men to storm the house and confront Joe. However, as they approached, the mercenaries hesitated, realizing that Joe was no ordinary opponent. Their reluctance infuriated Orland, who couldn't tolerate weakness in his ranks. In an instant, Orland ruthlessly executed all 3 of his subordinates, intensifying the situation. Meanwhile, Joe and Chester realized they were now completely surrounded by Orland and his men. Chester, wincing in pain, sat on the floor, complaining of a sharp ache in his back. He reached out his hand to Joe, silently asking for help to get up. Without hesitation or suspicion, Joe extended his arm to assist his friend. In a sudden, swift motion, Chester pulled out a syringe and drove it straight into Joe's arm. With a cold smirk, he revealed the brutal truth: the syringe contained a lethal toxin of his own making. Joe had only 24 hours to live unless he could obtain the antidote. Chester promised to provide it, but only if Joe handed over the hard drive. Realizing he had no other option, Joe reluctantly agreed. Joe agreed, but with one condition: the hard drive would only be handed over once they had dealt with Orland and his men. Chester accepted without hesitation. Wasting no time, he swiftly opened a window, raised his gun, and aimed at a nearby power pole. With a single shot, the bullet struck its target, causing the pole to explode and plunging the entire area into darkness. Below, Orland and his men immediately sensed something was wrong. Without hesitation, Orland and his men unleashed a relentless barrage of gunfire at the house, marking the start of an all-out battle. Orland then tossed a smoke grenade, quickly engulfing the house in a thick, suffocating haze. The air grew heavy, and his men began coughing uncontrollably. But Joe and Chester had anticipated this move and were prepared to counter. Amid the chaos, Chester pulled the pin on a grenade and threw it toward the garage door. The deafening explosion sent the garage door flying off its hinges, creating an escape route. However, the blast also knocked the hard drive from Joe's grasp. Seizing the moment, Chester lunged forward, grabbing it before Joe could react. With a swift, powerful blow, Chester knocked Joe to the ground and made his escape, leaving Joe alone to face Orland's mercenaries. Outnumbered and weakening with each passing moment, Joe had no choice but to keep fighting for a way out. As the battle raged on, one of the mercenaries suddenly pulled the pin on a grenade and threw it directly at Joe. The explosion rocked the entire house, its shockwave sending Joe hurtling through the air, further worsening his already dire condition. As the dust and smoke settled, Orland slowly stepped forward, raising his gun and aiming it directly at Joe. He coldly asked why Joe hadn't just handed over the hard drive from the beginning to avoid all this violence. Joe, though barely able to stand, responded with a question of his own: why was the hard drive so valuable that Orland would go to such extreme lengths to get it? Orland revealed that the hard drive contained damning evidence of corruption involving the CIA director and other high-ranking U.S. officials. He claimed it held secrets so explosive they could bring the most powerful figures to their knees. Without a moment's hesitation, he nonchalantly admitted that he was the one who had shot down the CIA jet to steal it. Hearing this, Joe realized that Orland was no mere mercenary working for Russian intelligence. His involvement went far deeper than he had initially thought. Joe realized that, like him, Orland was after the same goal: exposing corrupt U.S. officials. After a brief moment of apology, Joe revealed the truth: the hard drive had been taken by Chester. He then made a bold proposal. They should join forces to track down Chester, who was likely headed to the motel where Laura was in danger. Orland agreed without hesitation. On their way, Joe made a direct call to the CIA director, his voice resolute as he declared his intention to bring the director's entire web of corruption to light. The CIA director responded with a smug tone, taunting Joe as he emphasized that Chester had already secured the hard drive. He gleefully reminded Joe of the poison coursing through his body, gleefully noting that he had less than 24 hours to live. However, Joe calmly revealed that the toxin hadn't fully entered his system yet, meaning he was far from being in any immediate danger. The CIA director wasted no time, immediately ordering the deployment of armed drones to eliminate both Joe and Orland. Moments later, 2 drones appeared overhead, soaring through the skies above the Polish countryside, scanning for their targets. It wasn't long before they locked onto Joe and Orland's vehicle. The drone operators wasted no time, unleashing a barrage of gunfire that tore through the air, setting the vehicle ablaze in a violent explosion of flames. Joe acted swiftly, jerking the steering wheel and flooring the gas pedal to dodge the deadly onslaught. Yet the drones remained relentless, closing in with every passing second. The chase intensified, with wave after wave of gunfire rattling the ground beneath them. Pushing the car to its limits, Joe and Orland fought to stay in control, but the vehicle suddenly lost traction, skidding off the road and flipping onto its side. Miraculously, both managed to escape without injury. Without wasting a moment, they quickly regrouped, their focus locked on the lethal UAV circling overhead as they readied themselves for a counterattack. After a fierce struggle, they successfully brought down one of the drones. But just as they exhaled in relief, Orland unexpectedly turned his gun on Joe from behind. Before he could fire, a gunshot rang out. Laura had acted first. The bullet struck Orland and he crumpled to the ground, but the ordeal was far from over. The remaining drone swiftly retaliated, unleashing a devastating attack that ignited a massive explosion. The air was thick with smoke and fire, and debris rained down around them. Amid the chaos, Joe and Laura wasted no time. scrambling to escape as the fight continued to rage on. With serious injuries, Joe managed to take Laura to a peaceful lakeside nearby, seeking a moment of respite. Still weakened from her brutal fight with Orlan's right-hand man, Laura's body was exhausted and barely able to defend herself. Joe carefully tended to her wounds, doing everything he could to ease her pain and help her regain her strength. His unwavering care slowly began to bring her back to herself. Just as they started to find some semblance of peace, Chester unexpectedly appeared, catching Joe completely off guard. Joe, perplexed, asked why Chester was still here instead of heading to the U.S. to deliver the hard drive. Chester, looking strained, explained that he couldn't leave because he was suddenly feeling weak. With a knowing look, Joe revealed the truth: he had poisoned Chester, not himself. He then pulled out a vial of antidote, explaining that the drink Chester had consumed earlier contained the lethal toxin. Now it all made sense. This was the reason Joe had refused the drink in such a tense moment. He made Chester an offer. He would provide the antidote, but only if Chester handed over the hard drive and agreed to help take down the CIA director and other corrupt officials. With no other option, Chester reluctantly agreed. And so, an uneasy alliance was forged between the three of them, united by a shared mission.